Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, friends and family, and everybody else, such a great pleasure to be with you today on the third episode of Season 5 of Real Talk with Billy and Cory, live from our homes, brought to you by Zoom University. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Hot Take Billy Parvatam on hand, joined by my podcast partner, Uncle Cornelius Michael. Some people call him Cory Van Dyke. Cory, it's great to be back with you for number 3 this season, along with a special guest.
Yeah, it is great to be back. Like we've talked about, sports are back. Baseball is back. MLB is back. And hopefully in the near future, college football will be back. So we got a lot on the lineup today.
For sure. And now it's time to introduce our special guest. In fact, he is the second guy to come on the podcast twice, none other than Virginia Tech's own Jake Lyman. Jake, class of 2022. He was actually back on our podcast. I went back and looked at it the week leading up to the Super Bowl. So you came on for a pretty big podcast. But Jake, thanks so much for joining us for the second time.
Yeah, thank you guys. It's an honor to be one of a very select few to get multiple appearances on the podcast. So definitely excited. Like Cory said, sports are back, so we got a lot to talk about today.
And for sure. In fact, the only other guy other than you that's been on the podcast 2 times is All-American Evan Hughes. Still getting used to saying that. But, Jake's got a few other things that Evan doesn't. But I'm not going to go there. But let's move on now to college football. We all mentioned it. Of course, you're looking at 2 Virginia Tech alums. And, of course, Jake, the young guy, still got a few years at Tech. But big news coming out last week that Virginia Tech and really the ACC has modified their schedule to a conference schedule and kind of did a randomized schedule. Virginia Tech's now playing Clemson at home, among other things. And, again, keeping really every Power 5 conference is playing in conference, I believe. So, Jake, we'll start with you. What are your thoughts on what we've seen with college football, and what do you make of what's going to happen over these next couple months?
Well, it's definitely going to be interesting. It's going to be a very tough month here leading up to when the season is supposed to start. I mean, yeah, we've got these schedules out now. Well, schedules. We have opponents. We don't really have a schedule out. No one knows when these games are going to be played. And really, we haven't heard much about protocols when it comes to how they're going to limit the spread of COVID-19. And especially with these players being student athletes, they, depending on their schedule, have to go to class and interact with other students and teachers and employees at the university. So it's going to be a very tough process for them to get this going. And I think even once it starts, it's going to be even harder to keep it from falling off the rails and, ending up as a 2 or 3 game season in the end.
And Cory, of course, the big news around Virginia Tech circles was that Caleb Farley would opt out of the season for the Hokies. He, of course, is a projected first-round pick as a defensive back. What were your thoughts on that and everything else that's come on so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you look at Farley, and with him being pretty much projected everywhere first-round pick, there wasn't a whole lot that he was going to do this upcoming year that was going to change his draft stock. That's obviously the ultimate goal for him. I mean, I've heard nothing but good things said about Farley and just the relationship he's had with his teammates or anything like that. So I don't think it's a notion of him quitting on a team or anything like that. Like, it literally is just him looking out for his future. And especially when there is, so much uncertainty going on, like Jake was talking about, with no kind of real protocols put out there. No, I think he even cited that in his video, saying there's just kind of the lack of understanding of what it's all going to take for this season to even happen. I mean, I think this is just going to be, he's the start of, I think, some big names across college football that will probably opt out. And we've already seen it in the NFL so far, how, it started with a few guys at first, and then it's kind of started this domino effect. So I think you'll likely see more stars in college football begin to do that as, there's more of an understanding, even as we get kind of closer to the date before, who even knows if we'll be playing anyway, if it even requires to be opting out, at a certain point. But it is exciting that, a model has been agreed to where there's 10 opponents out there now, plus the possibility of one non-conference team that Virginia Tech fans can kind of get excited about again, and not have this these uncertainties weighing over them in terms of who they might be playing. So I think it's certainly going to be intriguing where every week kind of means something for that race. I think it's kind of across ACC circles kind of talked about as the race to see who plays Clemson in the ACC championship eventually. So it'll be fun to watch. I know the Hokies are going to be one of those teams. If this season is played, that will be battling up there. So I kind of like the idea of this little 10-team all-conference and then plus the one non-conference to determine, how it all turns out.
Jake, I was going to ask you this, kind of going off about Caleb Farley. If you're a Trevor Lawrence, any of these big-name first-round draft picks, would you even play this season if there is a season? I mean, you think about it, there's not really much for you to gain and just more risk for you to add on to yourself. You don't know if you're going to catch COVID, another injury, something along those lines. So if you're a Trevor Lawrence, any of these big-name college football players, would you even consider playing this season?
Well, I was actually going to bring up Trevor Lawrence specifically. I mean, the dude is the consensus number one overall pick. I really don't think anybody could outperform him this season and change that. Even Justin Fields, if he went out there and won the Heisman, I still think Trevor Lawrence is the number one overall pick. So what's the incentive for him to play? I mean, you're putting yourself and possibly your family at risk. You always have the risk of injury. If he goes out there and, tears his ACL or breaks his leg, then you probably are going to have your draft stock lower slightly. So I don't see why he would play unless maybe he wants to go win a Heisman or go win another national championship if he's that kind of competitor. But from a financial standpoint, it really doesn't make any sense for Trevor Lawrence or some other big name guys to play at all this year. But we'll see. We still got about a month leading up. And like Cory said, I think Caleb Farley probably is just the beginning when it comes to these high-profile guys opting out. You got to be smart and make sure you're taking care of yourself down the road in the future. And, sitting out this one football season probably is in the best interest of a lot of those guys.
Looking specifically at Virginia Tech this season, Cory mentioned that a lot of starters returning for the team. They were one game away from making it to the AC championship game. A lot of people expect them to make it to the AC championship game. Cory, what are your thoughts on, again, we don't know if the season's even going to be played, but what are your thoughts on Fuente's expectations for the season? We all remember last season where there were a lot of calls for him to get fired, especially with the horrible start after that Friday night Duke blowout loss. Many people expect them to contend for an ACC Coastal Championship division winner this year. Is he on the hot seat if Tech does not live up to those expectations, or are you kind of at a point where, this whole year is pretty much a wash because of COVID? It's going to be hard to judge anybody on normal expectations when the season won't be normal.
Yeah, I mean, I think you kind of hit it there at the end. It's even guys that are like firmly on the hot seat might have a little bit of breathing room with this season, just expectations that go along with it. But I don't think Justin Fuente is anywhere near being on the hot seat. I mean, there was rumblings, of course, after the Duke game, but I think he kind of reassured himself after the look that, the Hokies had to end the season. I think going, 7-2 over the last few weeks, 7-3 maybe, something along those lines. So I think, Justin Fuente has, his guys in place now. It's firmly his team. It's no longer, the guys from Frank Beamer era. It is his players now, and he has his assistants there now. So there is a little bit of expectation that comes with that. But I don't think, I don't see the Hokies performing to a level where Justin Fuente will be on the hot seat. Now, if they go out there and, are 1-9 or 2-8 or whatever, then you could certainly start having those discussions. But if they finish anywhere, above 500, I would even say I don't think that's even a remote possibility.
Jake, what are your thoughts on that? And also, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on something that's always fascinated me, and I know it's fascinated Cory, about the whole Fuente to Baylor fiasco that happened last offseason. First of all, I thought it was a better job. I mean, Baylor's a better job than Tech. I mean, you're in the Big 12. You're in the state of Texas. A lot of great football players come out from there. And Lincoln Riley's always been linked to NFL jobs over the years. And so if he leaves, all of a sudden Baylor could overtake Oklahoma in the Big 12. And then again, just from a recruiting standpoint, I mean, you've got facilities that Baylor has that Virginia Tech doesn't have. I thought, Fuente probably should have taken the job if you're just going off of pure attractiveness of the job. And then on the other hand, I was also like, I mean, has Fuente really done anything to deserve that job? I mean, sure, Tech's had a couple nice seasons, but really after his first two seasons, they haven't been able to get back to the initial level of success that they had. So what were your thoughts on that whole situation? That's something that's fascinated me, I know, since it happened.
Well, yeah, that whole saga was a little bit confusing, and I think Justin Fuente is very highly regarded among people in the business. You see that I don't know if he was ever offered the Baylor job, but it definitely was. There were conversations about it, and I think the Virginia Tech fan base maybe underrates him a little bit in the way that he's been able to develop players. I mean, a lot of the guys like Caleb Farley was a 3-star wide receiver. So was Divine Diablo, and both of those guys are going to be probably day 1, day 2 picks in this upcoming NFL draft. I saw that on Twitter the other day. I want to give credit to whoever I saw that from, but I don't remember who it was. So I think Justin Fuente is highly regarded. You mentioned if Lincoln Riley left for the NFL, I think Justin Fuente would be highly considered for that Oklahoma job. I mean, that would be probably his dream job when it comes to college football, being a head coach at Oklahoma, where he attended Oklahoma, I believe. So Justin Fuente is probably not long for Virginia Tech if he has a ton of success or a ton of failure. But either way, I think this season is make or break, maybe not for his job, but like Cory said, his players are in there at this point. This isn't Frank Beamer's team led by Justin Fuente. This is Justin Fuente's team. Probably the most talent he's had on a roster since 2016. If he is not at least contending for one of those 2 spots in the ACC championship, then I think the seat starts to warm up just a little bit.
So you don't think, even with COVID and everything going on, we don't know how normal the season's going to be? You think if that happens, and the team doesn't live up to expectations, he's on the hot seat?
I wouldn't say there is any significant chance that he gets fired after this season. I think Justin Fuente will be the coach of Virginia Tech in 2021, pretty much no matter what, unless, like Cory said, he goes 1-9 or 2-8 or something like that. But I think that if he doesn't live up to expectations with the roster he has now, that's when, the calls will start coming. And I think after that, 2021 would be the year. If he doesn't succeed, he's done.
Interesting. So before we transition away from college football, what you guys, and again, we know that this keeps changing, every day, but as of August 3rd, 2020, about a month or so, month and a half until college football is supposed to start. I think they pushed it back to September 26th. Your prediction, again, just for today, do you think we will have college football, Cory? Start with you.
I think we will at some point, whether that's the fall or whether that's the spring, that's to be decided. But I think there will be some, or at least an attempt of a 2020 season. There will be some games played. I don't think it'll be completely canceled.
Jake, how about yourself?
Yeah, I agree with Cory. I think there will be an attempt at a college football season. How successful that attempt is yet to be seen. But I think in the fall, we will have some form of college football in September. The question is, does that get you through October and November and into December? And I'm skeptical at best when it comes to that prospect of actually getting through the season.
I agree with you guys. I think we'll start. Whether or not we finish is another story. I think it'll be interesting to see how they schedule, because for now, all of a sudden, do you want to play Ohio State, Michigan, for example, in September, early on in the season, where you'll be able to play at least a higher chance than you would at the end of the season, as opposed to not. So we will see what happens. Of course, a lot of things happening in college football. Again, it's only August 3rd, but you kind of feel like you're ticking against the clock a little bit. Let's now transition to the MLB. We're about a week and a half into the season. Season started July 23rd. It's been a bumpy road, I think, to put it pleasantly. As the Marlins, I think, have now had up to 20 players or 20 players and personnel test positive. And actually, I was looking at a text that our friend Bassam, and I believe Jake has met Bassam too, but a picture that he sent us from over the weekend. I mean, you had, I think, 4 series that ended up being postponed: Nats, Marlins, Reds, Tigers, Phillies, Blue Jays, and then the Cardinals, Brewers. So I think it was 5 series, which 10 teams. And so really you see how kind of the butterfly effect of one team with the Marlins getting so many COVID tests, COVID cases ends up affecting all these other teams. Cory, what's your thoughts on the state of affairs right now in baseball. Of course, Rob Manfred reportedly told Tony Clark, the MLB Players Union president, that if we don't turn this around, we might have to cancel the season. So what's your thoughts on how that situation has really escalated so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's just difficult because kind of like you were saying, as soon as, you could not even have any positive tests on your team, but if you're scheduled to play the Marlins, you're affected because now you don't have a series that's scheduled for that time. So it has like these long lasting effects for these teams, that have gone according to all the protocols. And, that was even part of the issue. They're saying the Marlins didn't follow all the protocols in place and stuff like that. But you have these teams that have done everything right that are being, negatively affected along the way. And I think that even, that's going to be an issue across all sports, not just baseball, but if college football starts back and, you find out after a week that these two teams have played against each other and one of those teams has positive tests, then, that other team has to, quarantine per se too and begin all their testing all over again and whatnot. So it's just has these, I don't think you realize how significant one test has and how many people that then affects. So I think that's just kind of the worrisome thing is knowing, man, like you said, where, 10 teams had a game, at least one game postponed this past weekend in the MLB season and we're not even, 2 weeks into the season yet is kind of worrisome. But I mean, I'm remaining hopeful. I'm remaining that they'll figure it out. And these guys this might even be a wake up call for a lot of them to know, like, man, like this, really could be an outbreak can happen within a team. And we really got to take this seriously.
Jake, what's your thoughts on what's happened so far? I know you're a Tigers fan. I saw some of your tweets about how they've had some early season success. But what's your thoughts on everything that's happened? And do you think baseball could have pulled off a bubble like the NBA did?
No, I don't think they could have. I think with the rosters as big as they are, kind of like the NFL, you're not going to be able to have a bubble that's going to work. At least they mentioned Arizona as a possible bubble, but the issue with that is there's only one indoor stadium. It's 105 degrees outside every day in Arizona. It just wouldn't have worked. And I think the MLB is doing the best with what they have, but they're put in the toughest position out of any of the major sports leagues because they're playing every single day. And the tests that they're taking they're not instantaneous. You're not getting the results back the second that you take the test. So at some point, you're going to have that lag behind where somebody who doesn't have a test result back is playing a game and they're COVID positive, and then that starts to spread. So I don't think a bubble would have worked, but, looking at the NFL, who's going to be in a similar situation where they're going to have to travel and they're not going to be in a bubble, I think it'll work better because there are those 6-7 days between games that will limit those outbreaks and possibly, find some other players to fill in if you do have an outbreak of COVID on your team.
Cory, I was interested in, taking a look at the extra inning rule that's happened so far this season. I don't know if the Giants or the Tigers, you guys can fill me in on that, if they've played a 10 inning or extra inning game yet. I know the Nats did a few days ago, and I thought it was really interesting because it really does add, I think, more strategy than people initially gave it credit for, because and I think the Nats analyst FP Santanzo explained this, especially if you're a road team, how do you play the situation? Because you almost have to play it like you're going to get one run. So do you play for two? How does it affect where you're at in your batting order? If you got the heart of your order coming up, are you going to bunt? I mean, I think the Dodgers-Astros game last week, they played, 13 innings, and I don't think either team bunted the first 3 innings. So I think it's really added a lot more strategy than I think it was initially given credit for. Cory, what's your thoughts on what you've seen of it so far?
Yeah, well, the Giants have had one, and they subsequently gave up 6 runs in the top of the 10th inning, so it really didn't matter at that point. But yeah, I mean, I think it is. I think the thing I've been blown away by is just like how many teams don't score in these situations. Multiple games where teams have gone. I think we were even talking about the other night where the Rays and Orioles were going, and the Rays didn't score in either the 10th or the 11th inning. It's like you think if you were to have a runner on second with no outs, all this time, you almost think like, man, a 1 run should be, it's not going to be automatic, but it should be up there, 75, 80% of the time you're scoring that run. And to see that, a lot of these teams aren't scoring right away with that runner on second is kind of the thing that I think has alarmed me the most. And maybe it is coming down to, a lack of strategy, if not, wanting to bunt a guy over and then, just hitting one into the outfield for a sac fly. That's what I've always looked as like, man, that's the easiest way to score a guy from second there. But I think, especially in the era of baseball we are now, where it's a lot of strikeouts and a lot of home runs, you are able to get out of these innings a lot more of pitchers and just gearing up for a strikeout in those situations. So I think, there's a lot that's gone into it. And that's really kind of the one surprise that I've had, and just the one kind of takeaway is that, man, it's not, as guaranteed as a score as I thought it would be when you start that runner on second with no outs.
Also got to give credit to the pitchers. I mean, they're doing their job, tough to hit. Jake, what's your thoughts on the rule? First of all, what were your thoughts when you initially heard it? And now how have you changed or not changed having seen it played out?
I didn't like it when I first heard of it all that much. I thought, yeah, we want pace of play to be improved. We don't want these games going 4.5 hours. But, it feels weird to start an inning with a runner on second. Like the other day, I don't know what game it was, but there was a 1-2 inning because somebody struck out and then they lined into a double play. So first time ever that 3 batters didn't come to the plate in an inning. So I thought that was weird, but I do kind of like how it is playing out. And like Cory said, you have that extra strategy. Like I think NL teams should have an advantage. They've been playing small ball for years, with no DH and liking to bunt runners over and get the sac fly and just kind of manufacture runs. So I think that should be easier. Like Cory said, people should be scoring a little bit more often. But we'll see how it works out here as we get further into the season. But I like it more than I thought I would when I first heard the new rule.
Yeah, for sure. And like we've talked about on the podcast before, it's a rule that we've seen in the minor leagues already. So we've already seen it in some levels of professional baseball. I wanted to also talk about something I saw on Twitter today. It was Mark DeRosa, who works for the MLB Network, saying that Aaron Judge is now the face of baseball. Of course, Aaron Judge off to a great start this season. Got a couple home runs, I think 12 RBIs. Cory, I kind of saw you shaking your head. Do you agree with that? Or do you think there's someone else that you think is the face of baseball?
I mean, yeah, Judge has gotten off to the hottest start, and he's, a young guy, only, third or fourth year in the league, something like that. But I don't think you can take away that from Mike Trout. I think he's still the guy that, Mike Trout's he doesn't have the big popularity, that a face of baseball maybe does have, and just kind of like the outspokenness that a face of baseball does have. But, when I think of, who's the best player in baseball and who should be the face of baseball, it just automatically comes back to Mike Trout for me. He hasn't put up, like I said, the same numbers that, Judge has this year. No one is putting up the same numbers that Judge has this year. But just because, a guy has a hot streak for 1.5 weeks so far doesn't mean he automatically becomes, and surpasses these other guys too as the face of baseball. And, I mean, we've even seen a lot of stars have struggled out of the stretch so far. I think Christian Yelich started out like 1 for 27 at the plate. We see a lot of Astro hitters struggling. We don't know if that's actually because they're not getting those signs anymore, or it's because, it is a lot of these hitters struggling and whatnot. So I think, pump the brakes a little bit on that. Judge is, of course, a great player, but I wouldn't go so far to put him in that category yet.
Follow the Twitter page, Astros 2020 Shame Tour. I think it's what it's called. Great page, basically roasting the Astros all the time. Jake, feel free to comment on that. And also, I think another question that Cory kind of alluded to is, what can baseball do to really put its stars at the forefront? Because, you've got guys like Mike Trout and Bryce Harper, Garrett Cole, guys that are pretty well accomplished in the sport. But, compared to LeBron James, Tom Brady, some of these other sports in the NFL and the NBA, nowhere near as known as those guys. So what can baseball do to help market their stars more?
Yeah, I mean, that has to be a key for Major League Baseball. I think Mike Trout is possibly the worst marketed athlete of all time. I mean, he's been the best player in baseball for the better part of the last decade, and it seems like to a non-baseball fan, people still don't know who he is. Like, even if you don't follow the NBA, you know who LeBron James is. Even if you don't follow the NFL, you know who Tom Brady is. But it seems like Mike Trout is just kind of fallen by the wayside. He could be one of the greatest to ever play the game of baseball when it comes to all-around talent, five tools. I mean, he is so talented, and it just seems like he's kind of not put up on that platform like other stars in other leagues are. And going back to Aaron Judge being the face of baseball, that's just, I mean, it's complete recency bias that they're throwing in there right now. I mean, we do this all the time with sports, though. I mean, like Lamar Jackson being put number 1 on the NFL Top 100 is 100% recency bias. There's no way he's better than Patrick Mahomes, but he had one really great season, and people want to call him the greatest player in the NFL. So it's the same thing. Aaron Judge has had 5 great games in a row. That doesn't mean he's better than Mike Trout. Even Christian Yelich, I would put above Aaron Judge as possibly the face. Maybe even Bellinger and Betts, both on the Dodgers. Like, there are a lot of guys who I would probably put as the face of baseball ahead of Aaron Judge. He could get there if he puts up 40 home runs in a 60-game season, sure, but that remains to be seen.
And Jake, of course, is a very nice guy. He did not mention that, in fact, it was his Titans that beat Lamar Jackson and the Ravens in the playoffs. We have not had you on the podcast in a while, and at least, of course, since the season started. Do you have a prediction on who's going to win the World Series? I had Dodgers and Yankees, and Cory went a little bit out there with the Rays over the Dodgers. Do you have a prediction on who do you think is going to make it to the World Series and ultimately win it all?
That's tough. I mean, Dodgers-Yankees seems to be the easy prediction. I do like the Twins. Being a Tigers fan, it kind of hurts me to say that, but I do like the Twins out of the AL. And then in the NL, it does seem like the Dodgers are head and shoulders above everybody else. I mean, it's the Dodgers, and then you've got that next tier of kind of Nats, Braves, Brewers, all in that kind of bubble. I'll go Dodgers, Twins. That'll be my prediction there. I don't want to be basic and go with Dodgers, Yankees, but who knows? The Yankees and Dodgers could both have 20 guys get COVID in the next week, and then all of a sudden we're talking about the Tigers and the Marlins being in the World Series.
Yeah, we will see what happens with that. Cory, I know you said last week you wanted to wait a week and to see if you wanted to stick with your Pete Alonso prediction for MVP. I was going to hold you to that, so I'm going to ask, are you going to stick with it, or are you going to go somewhere else for your MVP prediction?
We're moving on from that. He hasn't gotten to the point yet. But in the same way, like, neither has, like I was saying, there's really no stars out there, that have really performed at a high level. You have, Aaron Judge. I think in NL, like, the top name right now is Dansby Swanson of the Braves. And, like, that's not a guy you're going to pick for MVP. Even like the Giants, Mike Yastrzemski, like, he's a guy who's hitting like over 400 right now. It's like, I don't think he's going to be MVP and keep this up, over the next 50 games or whatever. So, I mean, I'll switch it. And I'll go with the easy pick of Bellinger just because I think, he's such a stud on that team. And the Dodgers will, I think, automatically, be in contention at the end of the year. So I think, anytime you're on a team that's in contention, you're going to get that added boost a little bit. And, even with the way the Mets have looked recently, I wouldn't say things are going so smoothly for them where they'll be in contention at the end of the year. So I'll switch to Bellinger.
Final question for both of you guys on baseball. This is something I've been thinking about, especially if, they keep the season going but have to make a lot of modifications. We're already seeing now doubleheaders are going to be 7-inning games. And then I saw someone talking about how, if not every team plays 60 games, they might do it by winning percentage so that, they can even out if you didn't end up playing as many games. What do you guys think about that? I mean, Cory, I know you kind of mentioned this before. Is there a certain point to where, obviously we understand, like, this season, really for any sport, it's probably not going to be normal in any way. Is there a point that you guys say, like, all right, this is enough, we don't want to kind of make a mockery of the sport, or are you kind of just willing to take anything right now during this pandemic? Cory, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, me personally, I'm willing to just continue going as long as there's still over half the league is playing, as long as it's not going to every night where there's only, a few teams playing. But I think right now, if, the MLB is able to limit this and kind of use this as a learning moment and moving forward, then that's great. But if this, continues to get worse from this point, if it continues to go down and you see multiple outbreaks among multiple teams, that's when you kind of sort of, I think, have to reconsider. But if it is just going to be this thing where, you have a positive test pop up every now and then, I think the MLB can continue to work through that, and I'll be happy to continue watching it.
Jake, what's your thoughts on that? And also, like we did for college football, your prediction as of August 3rd, do you think the MLB will be able to finish the season?
As of now, yes. I think they've handled the Marlins outbreak pretty well. I mean, missing all of those games, it's going to be tough. But I think if you get to a point where everybody gets 50-plus games in, you do it by winning percentage. And the fact that they expanded the postseason this year makes me feel like no matter what, we're going to get a champion, a World Series champion who is representative of the best team in baseball this year. I mean, if you sneak in as an 8 seed and knock off the 1 seed in that 3-game series and get into the playoffs, like, yeah, sure, you wouldn't have made the playoffs in a normal year, but you had to beat the best team in your league 2 out of 3 to get to where you are. So I think the way the MLB has set it up, I think we're going to get a World Series champion this year, and I don't know if we'll have to put an asterisk by their names. We'll see based on how the rest of the season goes, but I think there will be a legitimate 2020 ending to the MLB season.
Agree with you guys. I hope it happens. And again, I think if you're able to get at least 50 games in, I think the winning percentage probably won't mean too much in the end. So we'll see what happens with baseball. Hope they can continue to monitor the situation well. Let's transition out to the NBA, and I was really excited to chat about this with you guys because, man, has it been a great, 4 or 5 days since the NBA came back. I mean, we've had a bunch of really close games, really exciting games. I think yesterday out of the 6 games, 5 of them came to the final shot. I mean, it seems like the NBA is doing a great job with this bubble. I was reading that they're cleaning stadiums for 3 hours after games are over. I don't even think players are even allowed to go into these places to work out after a game's over. So, knock on wood, it really seems like they've handled this situation well so far. Jake, what's your thoughts on what you've seen from the NBA?
I think they've done a really good job. It feels weird to watch it, though, playing on, the NBA court. It's weird to watch these games and think, wow, this is an NBA game. It kind of feels like a high school tournament or something, all playing on the same court and, like, no fans. And it's weird, but I agree with you that the product has been so good that it kind of it helps you ignore some of those little inconsistencies with what you're used to with NBA basketball. I mean, there have been so many good games so far, even just on opening night. Utah and New Orleans was a great game, and then you follow that up with an even better one with the Clippers and Lakers. We saw Portland and Memphis. They went to overtime, and that one's a huge game, trying to fight for that final seed in the West. Last night, my Suns knocking off the Mavericks with a huge comeback victory. So I've enjoyed watching the NBA more than I thought I would so far. I think they've really done it with it, and I'm really excited for these playoffs. I want to see a 7-game Clippers-Lakers series here on down the road.
For sure. I'm not going to call him out, but Corey might have had some money on the Suns and Mavs game. But Corey, what's your thoughts on what you've seen so far? And do you think this is the year that we could see a substantial upset? I mean, there's really no home court advantage in these games. I mean, you're playing in front – I guess they got the Zoom fans or whatever, but that's not the same as, if you were to play actually on a visiting court. What's your thoughts on what we've seen so far? And do you think we could see an upset this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jake really hit all the main talking points there where it is, it has been this exciting brand of basketball that we've seen coming back and just have all been kind of longing for, as sports fans waiting to see, these great exciting games that are coming down to the last quarter and, these top players going and battling against each other when you're seeing LeBron going against PG and Kawhi Leonard down the stretch, where you're seeing, Jason Tatum and Damian Lillard going against each other down the stretch yesterday, when you're seeing, Harden and Giannis going against each other. So it has this intriguing factor where, you're seeing great teams play every night too, because maybe not when you have teams like the Wizards and whatnot still in there, but for the most part, you're seeing great teams play every night. Playoff teams pretty much play every night. So it is intriguing from that aspect. And to hit like the second part of your question, I still have a hard time believing that, any team is going to upset the Bucks or any team is going to upset, the Lakers or whatever in the first round. I mean, I think you could have certain teams that maybe go on a surprise run. But it's still, I think, would be hard for us to not see one of those, those main teams that we've heard all year long kind of continue to make their run towards an NBA Finals.
Jake, what's your thoughts on a potential upset? Maybe it's not an 8-1, but do you think you could see a team like the Rockets, for example, one of those second-tier teams, being able to overtake the Clippers or the Lakers, for example?
I definitely do. I think that this situation, it kind of is that perfect storm for a possible upset, or like Cory was saying, a run from a lower seed in these playoffs. It's a 7-game series, so it's not like you're going to have a fluke or anything, but there's no travel. There's, like you said, no home court advantage. I think they're piping in noise that would be heard at home arenas. So like the Lakers will have "Let's Go Lakers" chants going on or something, but I don't think that's a huge advantage for the home team. So I think you could see, I don't know, a 7 knocking off a 2, or at least taking it to 6 or 7 games, which is something you normally wouldn't see in the NBA playoffs, where for the past few years, it just seems like the dominant team wins every single time, or who you expect to win wins every single time. I think there is, a perfect equation here for some chaos once these playoffs start.
And I think one thing that's going to be exciting when the playoffs start is, and you hope that the playoff teams will be especially careful. I think right now, a team like the Wizards that's not going to make the playoffs, they might not be as they might be, I think, keen to being more careless. But I feel like, these teams like with LeBron and Giannis and these big stars, they're going to really make sure their team, sticks to the protocol, doesn't do anything crazy in the bubble. And, hopefully we will continue the good trends we've seen so far with the low amount of cases and the NBA continuing to play high level of basketball. Jake, you got a prediction for the playoffs, whether it's the finals or who's going to make it to the finals, who's going to win so far? I mean, we're only a couple games into the restart, but who are you liking so far?
Just from what I've seen so far, I think it's pretty clear the Lakers and Clippers are the 2 best teams in the West. I mean, there are that second tier of teams, like you said, the Rockets. They've looked pretty good so far. James Harden just seems to be able to take over a game whenever he wants to. The Nuggets are good. The Jazz are good. So you've got some teams in there that could threaten them, but I would still go Lakers over Clippers in the Western Conference Finals. And then the East, I think the Bucks will play somebody in the Eastern Conference Finals and win. I think that's the Bucks conference to lose. And then I'll go Lakers in the finals. I think Lakers over Bucks. Again, it's the easy prediction, but I think that those 2 are the 2 best teams pretty much by far.
Cory, but how about you? How about you based on what you've seen so far?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we've talked about the Rockets a lot, and I think they're a series contender. I think they've shown that to me these past, the 2 games they've been back at least, is that, Harden's a guy that's going to take over in the fourth, and then Westbrook's been playing, the best basketball that he's played since he's been in Houston. So I think, right now they're the 4 seed in the Western Conference right now. I think the Lakers are hoping that they move up to that 3rd spot. I think whatever team, whether that's the Clippers or the Lakers, faces potentially in the second round as what would be either the 2-3 against the Clippers or the 1-4 against the Lakers, with the Rockets in that position. Neither team, I think, wants to face the Rockets in the second round. So I think, it is going to be hard to beat the Clippers or the Lakers the way we've seen them both play so far. But I think, we've talked about if any team's going to do it, I think it is the Rockets, and just the experience that they have had in the playoffs before. They have been able to, make that next step, but they are the team that I think could do it. So I don't know. I'm not going to pick the Rockets, and I still think it will be a clash between the 2 LA teams in the Western Conference Finals. And I've gone back and forth on who I think is going to win. I think, automatically, just like my brain kind of gravitates towards it's LeBron, and in the playoffs he's going to make it. But I think the Clippers definitely have the better team when you look at all their pieces. And, they've matched up extremely well against the Lakers. Even you look at this loss, they didn't have Lou Williams. They didn't have Montrezl Harrell, 2 of their biggest names coming off the bench. So when you put them back in the rotation there, and you put them back in, the recipe for success that the Clippers have, I think I'm kind of leaning towards the Clippers coming out of the Western Conference now. So I'm going to put that on paper right now. And then, like Jake, I'm going to have the Bucks coming out of the East as of now. I think it'll be a showdown between the Bucks and the Celtics. I believe Raptors are the number 2 seed as of now. But I think ultimately when it's said and done, the Celtics have a better overall unit and more just star power on that team. So I think it's going to come down to them. Then I'm going to go with it. I'm going to say the Bucks win it all in a surprise year. Giannis, they've had arguably the best team all year long. They have the best record, I believe, by 4 games over the Lakers. So you look at the Bucks, they've put it together all year long. I think you look at a guy like Giannis, he's going to, he'll have to put it on his back, but he also has guys like Middleton too, who I think is, potentially one of the most underrated players in the league when you look at just what he's done this year. So I think that's kind of where I'm leaning towards right now. I'll put it, write it in pencil on paper. I still have the ability to erase that, but that's what we'll go with right now at this point of the season.
And I've been on the Clippers bandwagon since the start of the season. I'm going to stick with the Clippers. Like you mentioned, they didn't have Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell, and they only lost by 2 points to the Lakers. I just think they have the best overall team. I think the Bucks will get to the championship, but, they haven't looked good, I think, especially coming out of the restart. So we'll see if they can turn around. I think the Raptors are a team to watch. I'm not saying they're going to beat the Bucks, but I really like the way they play. They don't really have – they have Pascal Siakam, but I think they have a really good team culture in there. Of course, the defending champions, Nick Nurse, is a great coach. So I think they're a team that I think could make things interesting. And, in fact, I actually think the Bucks and the Raptors, as of right now, would play each other in the Eastern Conference Finals. But I've got the Clippers over the Lakers, and I think they will beat the Bucks as well. I'm going to put that in pen, actually. I'm not erasing that. I'm stamping. I'm the mailman. I'm going to stamp the Clippers on there. I just think LeBron and AD, 2 great players, but I think LeBron's free throw shooting down the stretch will be tough. He's only a 70% free throw shooter. And I think the Clippers have some good bodies with Montrezl Harrell that can really, I think, bother Anthony Davis. So I'm going with the Clippers. Cory is going with the Bucks. And then, Jake, did you make a prediction? I know you had the Lakers and the Bucks, but
yeah, I'm going with LeBron. I'm not going to pick against the King, at least not until he shows that he's going to lose in the playoffs.
Sounds good. So exciting conversation on the NBA, and we're all very excited. And ESPN's carrying a lot of games too. So I think pretty much for the next until October, I think you can pretty much get the NBA daily on ESPN. So very excited to see that. I wanted to transition now to close out to this podcast to the NFL, but I wasn't necessarily going to talk about the actual play on the field. This is something I wanted to talk about when Jake first came on the podcast back in January, but that was a very special show because that was right after the passing of Kobe Bryant, and it was right before the Super Bowl, so we had a lot of stuff to cover there. But I'm glad we're able to cover it now because, Jake, I want you to weigh in on the college football versus NFL debate. And this is something that I've been by myself on against Cory, Evan Hughes, David Cunningham, Grayson Wimbish, Jordan Hutchinson. I mean, all these guys have had a different opinion, and yet you are the one guy that has had an opinion similar to me. So I want you to weigh in on that debate. Why do you think the sport that you're going to pick is better than the other?
I will always go with NFL football
over
college football. The NFL is a league built for 8-8, and I get that's a cliche, but it is. It's a league built for you to come back to the median, and in ways, it is a socialist type of league. Everybody gets the same amount of revenue in the salary cap, and if you succeed, you get the last pick in the draft. And if you are bad, you get the first pick in the draft. It gives everybody the opportunity to get better if you're bad. And that's just not college football. College football, you win a national championship and you come back and you are the number 1 team for the next 10 years. I'm looking at the Alabama Crimson Tide. I mean, you've got the same 8 teams heading into every single year who have a shot to get to a championship. And in the NFL, that's not true. I mean, you look at the 49ers, they were 3-13 2 years ago, and they just probably should have won the Super Bowl the year after. So I just think the competition's better. I love watching college football. I love Virginia Tech football. I'll watch all 11 games if they have them this year. But on the NFL, I don't care who's playing. It could be the Jaguars and the Jets playing each other, and I will watch that game from start to finish. I couldn't say that about some random game in the MAC. So I'll go with NFL forever.
Well, thank you for finally. Cory understands what it's like to be alone in this conversation for once. Like I said, we're not talking like passion. Like, yeah, of course you're gonna root for your school. College football has the passion. The atmosphere is great, but I'm talking from a pure parity standpoint. It's not even close to NFL. College football, you look at the last 10 years, it's basically been SEC or Clemson and Florida State. Really, I mean, NFL, people talk about the Patriots, and that is true. The Patriots have had success. But, you look at who they've played in the Super Bowl. It's not like those games have been a blowout. I mean, I think with the exception of that last one against the Rams, every Super Bowl the Patriots played in was by a possession or less. I think it's a win or go home. So the chance to beat a team one game, have all the luck come against you is much more there of a chance. College football, if you control the recruiting, you're going to be in the top 3, top 5 every year. I mean, Alabama's not going anywhere. Clemson's not going anywhere for the next 5-6 years at least. Cory, I'll give you your thoughts as the minority opinion for once on this discussion.
I mean, you say, just from a purely parity standpoint, but then, of course, yeah, then if you're just taking one outlook on it, then it would be NFL. But we're taking the whole picture, the whole overall big picture stance, and that's where college football comes in because atmosphere is part of college football. The rivalries are part of college football. Is there any rivalry, that is the same as, Michigan and Ohio State in NFL? I would say no. There's no game like that really just revs everyone up and wants to get them just juiced up and going. You look at college football and just the excitement of upsets. There are random chances where Ryan Fitzpatrick does lead the Dolphins to beat the Patriots, and that's an upset, but it doesn't hold the same excitement as, a random team that's outside of the top 25 beating a top, 5 team at home and storming the field and everything that kind of goes along with that and just all the different traditions at the stadiums. And, these guys are literally, they're not playing for a paycheck out there. They're playing for the love of the game. They're playing for their chance to get to that next part in the NFL. So I think, when you take all of that into consideration, yes, the NFL does have greater parity where you have these teams where, it's the any given Sunday type mentality, but also in college football, you got to realize when you're looking at just the Power 5, there are those teams like Clemson and Alabama, but besides those, all those other teams that are playing each other too, I think there's a lot of parity, outside of the top 5 teams when you look at it, and all that it comes down to with that. And teams fighting for conference championship and all that kind of, morphs together too to show parity. So I think you're kind of discounting that a little bit as well. And that, morphs together with, like I said, all the different atmosphere and traditions and everything that's along with college football makes it the superior football.
Jake, I'm going to go on a hot take here. I wonder if you agree with this. I actually think the college football playoff has actually worsened the disparity because if you think about it, Virginia Tech back in the BCS bowl game days, if you went 12-0 and you knocked off, a ranked team or two, you might have a better shot of making it to the championship. Now with the college football playoff, really you're maybe having 2 teams from a conference. I think the process has actually kind of made the pool a select few, and I think has actually hurt more teams' chances of making it to the playoff. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I can kind of agree with that. I think it's weird to me that people think that college football is a better product, and I agree with some of the stuff that Cory was saying. Rivalries like Steelers, Ravens, and Cowboys, and the Washington football team. Those would be 2 of the biggest rivalries in the NFL, and they don't come close to Michigan, Ohio State, for example, or even in the Commonwealth, UVA, Virginia Tech. No one gets as excited for Washington, Dallas as they do for Virginia Tech. But you look at the playoff, and it's been a couple years in a row, the 1 seed just runs the number 4 seed off the field. I mean, look at what LSU did to Oklahoma and what I believe is Clemson did to Notre Dame. they just got embarrassed as one of the top 4 teams in the country, supposedly. In the NFL, you look at, conference championship games. If somebody lost 58-3 or gave up 7 touchdown passes in the first half of the game, like that, it would be madness. But that just doesn't happen in the NFL. I feel like at this point, the NFL is a better product. But if college football could get to a point where you've got 16 to 20 teams at any given point who have a legitimate shot to go win a national championship, then sure, it could be better. But at this point, there's, like Billy was saying, it's Clemson, it's Alabama, it's Ohio State, it's Oklahoma, and 1 or 2 other teams depending on the year. So, yeah, I think the NFL just right now, yes, the passion isn't there. The rivalries probably aren't as big, but I had the choice on a Thursday night of watching Bengals, Jaguars, or I don't know, let's say Arkansas and Rutgers, I would choose Bengals, Jaguars, and I wouldn't have a second thought about it.
I feel like that's a mic drop to end that conversation. So we'll end it on that note. Really quick, Jake, before we let you go and we close this out, any hot takes you want to throw out there, any sport? I know NBA playoffs are coming, MLB. Anything you want to throw out there, any sport, doesn't matter.
I'll go with MLB, not this year or the year after, but my Tigers 2 years from now with Casey Mize, Matt Manning in the rotation, and then you got Spencer Torkelson coming up, as well as Riley Green. I tweeted this out on draft night, so this is already written down, but this is my hot take. Tigers, within the next 5 years, will be back in the World Series, unless, management completely screws it up. So that's my hot take.
And speaking of which, the Tigers had all the World Series winning pitchers last few years, but let them go with Scherzer, Porcello. So that must have made you feel good as a Tigers fan.
Yeah. I've had to watch. We had a rotation of 5 now World Series winners, and I believe 4 Cy Young winners: Verlander, Scherzer, Price, Porcello. They've all won the Cy Young, and got swept by the Orioles in the ALDS. So that felt good.
And also got swept by the Giants 1 year, but I didn't want to bring that up. But Cory, another good podcast with Jake on, and we're excited to see where sports takes us next few weeks.
Yeah, it's always great to have a recurring guest on like Jake. So appreciate Jake taking the time. And like you said, just looking forward to continuing to watch these sports, hopefully watching the NBA playoffs begin to take mold, watching MLB and really the true contenders begin to take mold. So I know we'll all 3 of us will be monitoring it going forward.
And Jake, thanks again for coming on, and please come back. And of course, best of luck to you, as hopefully you get to call some games sometime this semester.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you guys for having me on again. Always a pleasure to be on the podcast.
For sure. So for our special guest, Jake Lyman, and my podcast partner, Uncle Cornelius Michael Van Dyke, I am Hot Take Billy Parvatam on hand. We thank you so much for joining us for the 3rd edition of Season 5 of Real Talk with Billy and Cory. We'll see you next time. Love you 2000.